The bed rails felt cold under my hand when I woke, and the thin hospital blanket barely kept the chill off my legs. I tried to steady my breathing, but something in the room felt off. The nurse stood at the foot of my bed, reading my admission form, her eyes slowing over one line. She didn't look confused. She looked alarmed. She stepped closer, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. Her face stayed calm for anyone glancing inside, but her eyes darted once toward the curtain where my daughter waited. She lowered the chart slightly and leaned in, as if adjusting my IV line. Her breath barely touched my ear. "Call your lawyer. Tonight." I didn't turn my head. I didn't speak. I just watched her step back, hands steady, face expressionless, as if she had said nothing at all. The curtain shifted, and my daughter poked her head through with a bright smile that didn't match the tension floating in the air. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked, voice too cheerful for a surgical ward. The nurse kept her back straight and gave a polite nod as she handed me a pen to initial a space on the form. The line she pointed to made no sense. I didn't remember agreeing to anything beyond the basic procedure. The wording was strange, buried in small print, nothing like the simple consent I signed earlier in the day. My daughter stepped fully into the room, carrying a bag of fruit she knew I wouldn't eat. She placed it on the counter with a smile that felt practiced. "I told you the procedure was nothing," she said. "Just rest. They'll take good care of you." Her voice was smooth, but something in her eyes tightened when she looked at the papers in the nurse's hands. The nurse tapped a section on the form, her finger lingering just long enough for me to see a phrase I couldn't understand. Authorization of decision proxy. I tried to replay the moment I supposedly signed it, but my memory held nothing. The last few hours blurred together, and that blank space pressed a cold weight against my chest. My daughter stepped closer, pretending to straighten the blanket. "Don't worry about the paperwork," she said softly. "It's all standard. I handled most of it for you." She kept her tone light, but I felt her watch the nurse from the corner of her eye, as if guarding something. The nurse closed the chart carefully. She didn't argue. She didn't question. She gave a practiced smile, but her gaze held a warning I could feel in my bones. She excused herself politely and left the room with steps that seemed a little too quick. As the curtain swayed behind her, I lifted the form again. My initials were there, but the handwriting looked rushed, as if made under pressure or confusion. A quiet unease spread through me. My daughter pulled up a chair, crossing her legs casually, but her attention stayed fixed on the signature line. "You don't need to read all that," she said, voice lowering. "It's just routine." The room hummed with machines, but the silence between us felt louder. I studied the curve of the initials again, the odd phrasing of the clause, the urgency in the nurse's whisper. Something wasn't right. Not about the form, not about the tone in my daughter's voice, not about whatever I had supposedly agreed to. I folded the form slowly and set it on my lap. The nurse's words replayed in my mind, sharp and clear. "Call your lawyer tonight." I sat back against the pillows and tried to steady my breathing, letting the room settle enough for my thoughts to line up. I've lived alone for almost 20 years, long enough to grow used to the quiet and the slow rhythm of my days. When my wife died, my daughter and I tried to stay close, but the distance formed faster than either of us expected. She built her life somewhere I didn't fully recognize, and I learned to keep my needs small. Her tone changed over the years. At first, she visited to help fix things around the house, or drive me to appointments, or sort through small errands. Then she began insisting on handling my bills because online systems were too confusing. She said it lightly, but there was a firmness in her voice I hadn't heard before. I let her do it because trusting family seemed natural. She started arriving with folders instead of groceries, setting them on the table and tapping pages with her fingernail. She called them simple updates: insurance renewals, bank notices, medical forms. Each visit felt more rushed than the last. She always stood behind me when I signed, reading each line with too much attention, but discouraging me from doing the same. I remember one morning when she pushed a stack of papers toward me and spoke quickly, as if trying to outrun my question. Her voice trembled slightly, something between urgency and fear. I signed anyway. There were moments when I caught something uneasy in her eyes, a dark tension under the surface. She brushed it off each time, claiming she was tired or stressed. I didn't press. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but a quiet thought lived at the back of my mind. She wasn't helping me manage my life. She was slowly taking ownership of it. Earlier today, when she drove me to the hospital, her behavior carried that same sharp edge. She kept correcting me when I tried to speak to the receptionist. She handed over my identification before I could reach for it. The way she gripped my arm during check-in felt more like guiding a client than supporting a father. The staff looked confused when she answered questions meant for me, but she kept control of the conversation without letting me interrupt. She filled out part of the admission packet herself, telling me it was all routine. I signed the final page because she placed the pen in my hand and said we were running late. I tried to reread the form, but she covered the lower half with her hand and told me to trust her. The nurse called my name at that moment, and my daughter used the distraction to guide me forward. I felt the pressure in her touch, the insistence in her voice, the way her smile tightened whenever someone questioned her involvement. As the hours passed, I began noticing details I hadn't seen before. My wallet was missing 2 documents I always kept inside. My phone had new settings I never changed. She repositioned my bedside table 3 times, each time adjusting the stack of papers as if hiding something among them. The unease grew stronger when I realized she kept glancing toward the nurse's station, watching who handled my chart and how long they looked at it. Lying here now, with the form folded beside me, I recognized a pattern I had ignored. Each decision she encouraged benefited her more than me. Each signature moved something from my hands to hers, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being certain which choices were mine and which ones she quietly guided into place. My daughter walked in before lunch with a brightness that didn't match the tension in the room. She picked up the admission clipboard from my bedside table and flipped through the pages like she already knew what was inside. "Everything they had you sign is routine," she said. She said it too quickly, before I even mentioned the form that bothered me. Her timing alone was enough to set something uneasy in motion. The nurse who entered behind her gave a polite greeting but avoided looking directly at my daughter. Instead, she focused on the monitors and adjusted the cords with careful hands. When my daughter asked a question, the nurse answered with short phrases, nodding without lifting her eyes. I watched the silent exchange, seeing caution where friendliness should have been. It wasn't disrespect. It was fear of saying the wrong thing. A medical assistant came in to take my vitals. A young man with an easy manner who didn't seem to think before he spoke. He glanced at the chart and said, "Looks like your daughter handled most of the intake for you." My daughter's smile faded for a second, and she stepped closer to him. "I just helped where needed," she said, her tone flat. The assistant nodded, but I could tell he realized he'd said more than he should. He barely met my eyes as he stepped out. After they left, I pulled the admissions packet from the drawer and went through it slowly. Several forms were there: procedure consent, emergency contact, basic questionnaire. But one section ended abruptly. A page was missing. The staples had been snipped cleanly, leaving a faint imprint where another sheet once sat. I pressed my thumb against the indentation, trying to imagine what had been taken out and when. My daughter came back with a cup of water. She didn't let me hold myself. She tested the temperature, then lifted the straw toward me as if I couldn't manage it alone. Every movement felt rehearsed. She checked my phone next, pressing the home button and scrolling through the screen without asking. She said she was making sure notifications were off, but she switched my password earlier without my permission. I watched her place the phone face down on the tray, her hand lingering on it a second too long. When a distant cousin tried to visit, she intercepted him in the hallway and told him it wasn't a good time. When a neighbor called, she silenced the phone before I could answer. Her voice stayed calm, but her actions didn't match the tone she tried to keep. Each small gesture narrowed the space around me, tightening control over every interaction. While she stepped out to make a call, I searched the tray for the missing pages. Instead, I found something else tucked under a folded appointment card. A sticky note with a lawyer's name printed neatly on it. The ink had been scratched out, leaving only faint outlines beneath the scribbles. I had never hired this lawyer. I didn't recognize the name. The fact that it had been hidden made my grip tighten around the edge of the bed. I sat still for a moment, listening to the low hum of machines and the distant chatter from the hallway. My mind began arranging the details I had ignored for months. The rushed signatures, the controlled phone settings, the sudden push for medical checkups, the way she answered questions meant for me. None of it felt random anymore. The nurse's warning replayed in my thoughts, sharper now. My daughter's insistence on calling everything routine no longer sounded comforting. It sounded planned. For the first time, I wondered if this hospital stay wasn't about my health at all, but about something she needed to happen while I was weak, sedated, and easier to direct. I waited until the hallway settled into its usual afternoon lull before moving. The machines beside me hummed in steady rhythms, and the soft beeping masked the quiet rustle of the blanket as I lifted it. My daughter had placed my bag beneath the chair earlier, insisting she organized everything for me. I pulled it closer and opened it slowly, careful not to draw attention. The inside felt different, lighter, missing items I usually kept tucked into the side pockets. I sifted through what remained. My wallet was thinner than usual. A few cards were missing, and a folded document sat where my insurance booklet should have been. I set it aside and continued checking. My jacket, draped neatly over the chair, had a weight in the inner pocket I didn't recognize. I reached inside and pulled out a second form, creased and hidden deep. It wasn't hospital-related. The header mentioned estate adjustments, something about beneficiary allocations. I felt a tight pull in my stomach as I scanned the lines. My signature should have been at the bottom, but the handwriting was uneven and rushed. A stiff curve replacing the shape I had written my entire life. I traced the letters with my thumb, trying to remember when she placed a pen in my hand for anything like this. The longer I stared at it, the more certain I became that the moment never happened the way this form suggested. The initials beside the signature looked just as wrong. The door opened softly, and I quickly slipped the form beneath the blanket. The nurse walked in with a clipboard, her expression neutral for anyone passing by. She checked my IV line and adjusted the curtain slightly to block the hallway view. When she leaned closer, her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Be careful what you sign," she murmured, eyes fixed on the monitor. Then she straightened and stepped back as if she had only given routine instructions. I didn't respond. Her warning wasn't meant for discussion. She left with her usual quiet steps, and the room felt heavier once the door closed. I reached beneath the blanket and pulled the document out again, placing it under the pillow to keep it close. My thoughts moved slowly, lining up every odd detail from the past few hours. The missing page, the altered signature, the nurse's silence. A small trash bin stood near the wall. Something inside caught my eye, a corner of a torn envelope poking out at an angle. I reached over, careful not to shift the IV tubing, and pulled it free. The envelope wasn't hospital issued. It was a personal one, something that must have been tucked into my bag earlier. Inside, I found a sheet of paper with neat lines of instructions. Several items were underlined, referencing account numbers, required signatures, and terms I had never reviewed. At the bottom, written in my daughter's handwriting, were 6 words that chilled me more than the rest. "He won't understand. Just sign for him." The note wasn't meant for my eyes. It was meant for someone handling the paperwork. My pulse quickened as I held the envelope, hearing the faint echo of the nurse's warning layered over my daughter's earlier insistence that everything was standard. I set the envelope on the table and forced myself to breathe slowly. The hospital lights flickered once, and the soft hum of the machines filled the room again. I looked around the space, seeing it in a new light, not as a place of safety, but as a place where decisions were being made for me while I lay hooked to wires and monitors. The pieces no longer felt scattered. The picture forming between them pointed toward something larger than consent forms or check-in mistakes. Whatever I had signed and whatever had been hidden reached far beyond medical care. It wasn't just paperwork, it was control. The hallway lights were dim when my daughter slipped into the room, the kind of late hour when most visitors had gone home. She didn't greet me or ask how I felt. She walked straight to the foot of the bed with a thick document in her hand and a pen already uncapped. "We need to sign this tonight," she said. Her voice was low but urgent, as if someone had given her a deadline she couldn't miss. She pulled the table closer and placed the form on it before I could adjust myself. Her hand hovered over the first page, covering the text with her palm. "It's just for insurance," she said. "Nothing complicated. They need it before midnight." Her smile flickered, not warm or steady, but stretched thin around something she didn't want me to see. I tried to shift the paper toward me, but she kept her hand pressed over the block of text. "Dad, please," she whispered, her tone tightening. "Just sign where I tell you. They're waiting on this." The heart monitor beside me began to beep slightly faster, each sound sharper than the last. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "You're working yourself up over nothing. Just trust me." The door opened behind her, and the nurse stepped inside, carrying a clipboard. Her eyes landed on the document instantly, then moved to my daughter's hand, blocking the text. "Is everything all right?" she asked. My daughter straightened and forced a practiced smile. "Yes, we're just finishing some financial paperwork for the hospital." The nurse nodded and moved to my IV line, adjusting it with slow, careful movements. Her pen slipped from her fingers and fell onto the table, landing directly on the edge of the form. When she reached to pick it up, she shifted the paper just enough for me to see a single heading printed in bold: durable power of attorney and property transfer authorization. My throat tightened. My daughter quickly covered the text again, but not before she saw what I'd read. Her breath caught. "That doesn't mean anything," she said too quickly. "It's just wording. All these forms use big terms." Her hands shook as she pushed the paper back toward me. "Dad, sign it, please. We don't have time for this." I didn't reach for the pen. The silence stretched between us, filling the room like pressure building behind a closed door. The monitor beeped faster. She looked at it, then at the curtain, then back at me. Panic flickered through her expression, breaking through whatever mask she tried to hold. "I'm trying to protect you," she said, voice strained. "You don't understand how complicated things are." When I stayed still, she pulled the document close to her chest, clutching it like it might slip away. Her breath grew uneven, and her eyes darted toward the hallway as if expecting someone to follow her inside. Without another word, she turned and walked out quickly, footsteps sharp against the floor. The door swung behind her, rattling against the frame. The nurse reached for the curtain and pulled it closed around my bed, blocking out the hallway light. She stood beside me for a moment, her voice soft and controlled. "You're not safe like this," she said. She didn't need to explain. The form, the timing, the pressure, it all carried the same shape of intent. I lay back against the pillow, feeling the weight of what I had seen settle in my chest. The missing pages, the forged signature, the hidden envelope, the nurse's warnings. They were no longer scattered suspicions. Together, they formed a truth I could no longer avoid. This wasn't confusion or miscommunication. It was a plan, quiet, deliberate, and waiting for the moment I couldn't fight back. The room was quiet when the social worker stepped in, a man in a gray sweater with a badge clipped to his collar. He introduced himself softly and pulled up a chair beside my bed, not rushing, not forcing conversation. He set a thin folder on his lap and explained that the nurse had requested a routine review of my paperwork. His tone was careful, the kind people use when they know bad news is coming but aren't ready to say it outright. He opened the folder and laid out the pages one by one. Some had clean margins, others had uneven edges where something had been removed. He tapped a section with the back of his pen. "These forms appear altered," he said. "They were signed under conditions that don't qualify as clear consent." His voice stayed calm, but the meaning landed hard. He asked if I remembered agreeing to any financial authorization. I told him I didn't. He nodded as if that confirmed something he already suspected. The nurse slipped into the room then, closing the door partway behind her. She placed another folder on the table, her movements quiet and practiced. "This is the copy someone put in his file earlier," she said, her tone neutral enough not to draw attention if anyone overheard. The social worker opened it and compared the two sets of papers. Some signatures matched mine, others were similar, but not exact. He traced one with his finger and then looked up at me. "These documents shouldn't be here," he said, "and they definitely shouldn't have been signed while you were under sedation." He glanced at the nurse, and she gave a small nod, confirming what neither wanted to say outright. Something wasn't just out of place, it was intentional. He found multiple signatures from my daughter on forms that weren't hers to complete. She had initialed sections reserved for the patient, bypassing the staff review process. Some notes showed her handwriting beside lines meant for medical personnel, as if she had been guiding decisions without authorization. The social worker's expression grew tighter with each page. He set the papers aside and leaned in slightly. "You need to call a lawyer," he said, lowering his voice. "This isn't a misunderstanding. These documents could change control of your accounts, your care, and your property." His tone had shifted, not alarmed, but firm, as if he needed me to understand the gravity even without raising his voice. Footsteps approached in the hallway. The nurse moved to adjust the curtain, blocking the doorway just as my daughter's voice carried down the corridor. "Where is he? Why are they talking to him?" Her tone had lost its practiced, calm. It had sharp edges now. The social worker straightened but didn't leave. He waited, listening. My daughter pushed the curtain aside, her eyes flashing between the nurse and the man seated beside me. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Why are you interfering? This is a family matter." The nurse stepped forward just enough to create space between her and the bed. "We're conducting a standard review," she said, her voice steady. My daughter scoffed and crossed her arms, glaring at the papers on the table. "He doesn't need outsiders confusing him." The social worker didn't raise his voice. "He needs clarity," he said, "and protection." My daughter's jaw tightened at the last word. She turned to me, her frustration sharp and exposed. "Dad, you know I'm only trying to help you. You don't need to drag strangers into this." She looked at the documents again, her reaction too quick, too defensive for someone with nothing to hide. My pulse steadied, not from calm, but from certainty. I realized then that whatever happened next, I couldn't trust her to manage my decisions. I couldn't leave the paperwork exposed or my safety in her hands. The social worker gathered the altered forms and stood. "I'll secure these," he said quietly. "They shouldn't stay here." The nurse met my eyes, her expression heavy with unspoken warnings. I understood. The danger wasn't imagined. It was already in the room. The hallway outside my room grew tense long before I heard her voice. Nurses moved with a different kind of focus. Calm, but alert. The way people behave when they expect trouble but don't want to provoke it. I sat upright and watched the shadows shift under the door. Then my daughter's tone cut through the quiet. Sharp, demanding, stripped of the softness she used earlier. "I need to see my father. Now." A staff member responded calmly, explaining visiting limits, but she pushed past his words with the same force she used on every boundary in my life. "He's my father. I have every right to go in." Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. The conversation stalled just outside the threshold, and I could sense the staff trying to hold the line without letting the situation escalate. I reached for my bag again, moving slowly so the motion wouldn't pull on the IV line. I gathered the documents I had hidden earlier, the estate form, the envelope, the altered signatures tucked between pages. I folded each one carefully and placed them into the inner pocket of my jacket. For the first time since the surgery, I felt fully awake. Every detail needed protection. Every page could decide the truth. A nurse passed my doorway and paused, giving me a quiet signal to stay still. She slipped a small folder onto my bedside table. "These came from your file," she whispered. Her tone held steady, but something in her expression showed strain. She didn't look toward the hallway. She didn't need to. We both knew who was standing out there. I opened the folder and saw copies of old bank statements I didn't remember reviewing. Several transfers were marked authorized, each amount larger than the last. Dates lined up in ways that didn't make sense. Transactions made while I was out of town, days I spent at home recovering, moments no one besides her had access to my accounts. The signatures looked familiar at first glance, but the curves lacked the pressure of my real handwriting. They were imitations, not matches. I set the folder down and exhaled slowly. The truth wasn't complicated anymore. She hadn't just stepped into my life to help. She had already taken pieces of it and tried to take more. The weight of that realization sat heavily across my chest. Not emotional, but factual. The kind of truth that leveled the ground beneath every memory. The whisper of rubber soles approached. The same nurse stepped inside, closing the door halfway behind her. "She's desperate tonight," she said softly. "Please be ready." Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was steady, the kind people use when they give life-saving instructions in quiet rooms. I nodded without speaking. She didn't stay long. She simply checked the monitors and left as quietly as she arrived. I placed the documents under my pillow where they couldn't be taken without waking me. Then I straightened my jacket over the chair and tucked the bank statements deep inside. My mind settled into a calm I hadn't felt earlier. Focused, deliberate, prepared. I wasn't fighting panic anymore. I was preparing for truth. The voices outside grew louder for a moment, then faded as staff guided her away from the door. I could still hear the frustration in her tone, but the distance gave me enough space to breathe. I leaned back against the pillows, letting the reality of the situation take its full shape. Whatever she wanted tonight, she wouldn't get through confusion or pressure anymore. Not from me, not after everything I had seen. I wasn't just holding evidence now. I was holding control. The hallway had gone quiet for almost an hour when the door suddenly pushed inward, the handle jerking hard enough to shake the frame. My daughter stepped inside with a force that didn't match the soft lighting of the room. Her hair was untidy, her breath sharp, her eyes too bright. She closed the door behind her without looking back, as if shutting out anyone who might stop her. "I'm done waiting," she said. She moved closer, her hands clenched at her sides. "I've been taking care of you for years. I've handled everything alone. I deserve control over what happens next." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a strange tremor, the kind that comes when someone has pushed past their limits and doesn't want to return. I sat up slowly, feeling the pull of the IV line as I adjusted. "I'm not signing anything else," I said. My voice stayed steady, not harsh. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer until she stood at the foot of the bed. "You don't get it," she said. "You've never understood the pressure, the bills, the responsibility. You think money just fixes itself. You think life waits for you." She pulled a folded document from her jacket and slapped it onto the table beside me. "This ends tonight. You need to sign this now so I can take care of what you can't." I didn't reach for it. She noticed my hesitation and leaned forward, gripping the sides of the table as if anchoring herself. "You're sitting here with nurses and strangers telling you what to think," she said. "Meanwhile, I'm the one drowning. I have creditors calling me every day. I have debts you don't even know about. Do you think I'm doing this for fun?" I studied her face, seeing the strain, the resentment, the desperation behind each word. She wasn't hiding it anymore. "You forged my signatures," I said quietly. "You transferred money I never approved." She flinched, not in guilt, but in anger that I knew. "You left me no choice," she said. "You've been dragging your feet for years. I needed access so I could fix things before everything collapsed. You weren't going to do it." She grabbed the edge of the form and shoved it toward me again. "Just sign it. It's the last one. After this, everything will be sorted." The curtain shifted slightly. A nurse stood on the other side, half hidden, her voice low but firm. "Mom, you can't be in here after hours." My daughter didn't turn. She kept her eyes locked on me. "You won't listen to them," she said. "You'll listen to me. I'm your daughter. I've earned that much." Her hand darted toward my jacket on the chair, the one holding the documents I had gathered. The nurse called for security the moment her fingers touched the fabric. My daughter yanked the jacket toward her, and the papers spilled onto the floor. The altered forms, the forged signatures, the envelope with handwritten instructions, all of it scattered across the linoleum. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to collect them before anyone else could see. "These are mine," she muttered, grabbing pages with shaking hands. "You don't understand. You can't just take this from me." Security entered the room calmly, 2 officers moving with measured steps. "Ma'am, you need to step back," one said. She clutched a handful of papers against her chest, her breathing shallow, her shoulders trembling. When she didn't move, they approached slowly, guiding her to her feet without force. The nurse knelt beside me and gathered the remaining documents, placing them safely on the tray. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The truth lay across the floor in my daughter's scattered attempts to hide it. As security led her out of the room, the weight of everything settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't panic. It was intent, built over months, maybe years. And tonight, it finally came into the open, where it couldn't be disguised anymore. The room felt strangely still after they escorted her out, as if the walls were absorbing the last traces of her voice. Security guided her down the hallway, their steps steady, her protests shrinking with each turn. When the door finally closed and the noise faded, the quiet didn't bring comfort. It brought weight. A nurse checked the monitor, then placed a gentle hand on my arm before stepping aside for the officers who entered moments later. The police spoke in calm tones, asking clear, simple questions. They didn't push emotional details. They focused on facts, what I had seen, what I had signed, what I did not remember agreeing to. The nurse and social worker waited nearby, offering what they had observed during the day. The officers took careful notes, their voices low out of respect for the ward. When they gathered the scattered documents from the floor, they placed each one into separate evidence bags, labeling them with quiet efficiency. A forensic technician arrived soon after, reviewing the 2 sets of signatures with a small magnifier. He didn't give conclusions on the spot, but the way he compared the strokes, the pauses in the curves, the pressure differences, it was clear he didn't like what he saw. He asked for my ID and signature for comparison. When I signed the clipboard, he nodded once, as if that confirmed what he already suspected about the forged forms. My lawyer arrived later, his coat still damp from the night air, and sat beside me with a measured calm. He asked for a rundown of everything that had happened. I kept the explanation short, letting the documents speak for themselves. He reviewed the forms one by one, then closed the folder slowly. "We're initiating an emergency revocation," he said. "Power of attorney, financial access, medical decisions. Everything freezes tonight." His voice didn't waver. It held the steady authority of someone who had handled cases like this before. He made several calls, each one methodical and direct. Within minutes, he had arranged a freeze on my accounts and notified the bank of unauthorized transfers. He requested a security alert for any attempts to access my records. The hospital staff coordinated with him, documenting the altered paperwork and securing the originals. No raised voices, no dramatics, just quiet, necessary steps, closing every door she had tried to open. The social worker returned with a formal report. He explained that elder abuse cases often unfolded in subtle ways. Paperwork altered, signatures pushed, decisions made under pressure. He spoke gently, giving each word enough room to settle. When he asked if I wanted protective oversight until full legal protections were reinstated, I agreed. His expression softened, not out of pity, but out of understanding. A nurse came in afterward to check my vitals. She moved with a calm steadiness, her hands warm and sure as she adjusted the cuff. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. She didn't elaborate. She didn't offer comfort beyond that single sentence. But it grounded me more than anything said that night. As the officers stepped out to finalize their reports, I leaned back against the pillow and let the truth wash over me in a way I hadn't let myself feel earlier. I thought of how close everything had come to slipping out of my control. My accounts, my home, my medical decisions, my name. The danger wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with threats or violence. It moved through forms and signatures and the quiet confidence of someone who believed no one would question her. The nurse dimmed the overhead light before leaving. For the first time that night, the room felt safer, not because the danger was gone, but because the truth was finally in the hands of people who knew what to do with it. Morning light crept through the blinds when the nurse walked in with a clipboard tucked against her chest. She pulled the chair beside my bed and sat without the usual hurry of the night shift. For the first time since I arrived, her shoulders looked relaxed. "Rough night," she said quietly. Her tone carried no judgment, only the calm of someone who had watched too many families break in hospital rooms. My lawyer arrived a few minutes later, standing by the window while she checked my vitals. The room felt strangely peaceful, as if the walls themselves were exhaling after everything they witnessed. When they finished going over the overnight notes, the lawyer closed his folder and rested his hand on the railing of my bed. "We'll finalize protections today," he said. "Financial blocks, medical limits, updated emergency contacts. Your decisions go through no one but you." His voice was steady, giving no room for doubt. The nurse nodded in agreement, adjusting the blanket with a gentleness that felt like reassurance, not pity. After they stepped out for a moment, I stared at the empty chair where my daughter had sat earlier in the week, smiling through forced cheer, guiding my pen across lines I never read. I thought about the pressure she carried, debts she hid, resentment she buried, choices she justified. But understanding her path didn't excuse any of it. People make mistakes, but forging signatures, reshaping someone's future, maneuvering their weakness for personal gain, those weren't mistakes. Those were decisions. My lawyer returned and spread a few papers across the tray. Simple forms this time. Clear language, no surprises. We discussed new boundaries, my accounts under direct legal monitoring, medical decisions locked behind written consent, home access limited to people I approved. Each safeguard felt like reclaiming something I didn't realize I had slowly handed away. He asked if I wanted to change my will. I told him I wanted time, not out of sentiment, but clarity. I wasn't ready to reshape my legacy while the wound was still fresh. He respected that without pushing. When he left, the nurse came back to check the monitor and paused at the foot of the bed. "You look more awake today," she said. Her voice carried the same tone she used that first night when she whispered the warning that started all of this. I studied her for a moment, the calm certainty in her expression, the quiet strength behind the simple words she'd offered. She saved my life with a whisper most people would have ignored. "I didn't realize how quickly things can turn," I said. She gave a small nod. "It happens more than you think. People trust the wrong hands. They stop asking questions." She didn't need to say more. The lesson was already clear, After she left, I sat quietly and let the morning settle around me. The hospital noises felt softer now. Footsteps, carts, distant voices. None of it carried the weight of danger anymore. I looked at the documents secured beside me, the signatures I understood, the decisions that were finally mine again. It struck me how easily vulnerability can disguise itself as trust, how danger can come through someone you love, speaking softly, smiling gently, insisting they're helping. Not everyone who stands close is standing with you. I repeated the truth the night had carved into me, the one that would stay long after I left. Room 214. Danger doesn't always shout. It signs your name for you. As I leaned back against the pillow, I thought of others my age, people who hand over their lives out of fear of being a burden or confusion or simple fatigue. We owe ourselves more than silence. We owe ourselves attention, questions, and the courage to verify every piece of paper put in front of us. Instinct saves us long before signatures ever do.